Hey, John, thanks for getting together. You're a hard man to pin down. I know you're a pretty busy guy.
Well, it's kind of you to take the time. Thank you so much.
Well, I just can't wait to hear more of your story, but I'd love to hear how you started in Massachusetts and ended up on a main street in Hong Kong with your name on a window. Just for starters, that's quite a journey.
Well, it's life is not the journey that you start out as, right? It is what happens along the way, and it truly is the journey, as you say. So I was originally trained. What I thought I wanted to do was to build scenery for Broadway. And so my undergraduate degree is a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Boston University, and it's a professional undergraduate degree. I much later in life, got an MBA. But at first I thought I was going to build scenery in New York. And then I decided, well, I really don't want to go to New York, so I went out to L.A. And I got to L.A. in the spring of 1980. And everybody went on strike that year, right, in the movies. So I starved. I don't know if you know the Rose Cafe, but these hands built the toilets in the Rose Cafe. So,
I'll never be able to use them again.
There you go.
The same way.
That's a thought, isn't it? We'll let that pass. So anyway, so around August of that year, there was an ad from Disney looking for carpenters to build scenery, and I needed a job. So
little project going on there.
Yeah, at Epcot. So these hands built the scenery. These hands built the scenery in Spaceship Earth.
Wow.
And that's
No
how I
small
ended
deal.
up with it. Yeah. So
Still looking great.
I'd
The
like to
hands
think
and the
so,
scenery.
but certainly not the hands. Certainly not the hands. So so let's see. So how did I end up getting to these various places? I think one of the things you got to remember when opportunities come along, you got to be flexible, right? So I was asked to go to Florida. I was supposed to go for 4 months. Matt Pretty was my boss at that time, came down to visit me. He said, how long can you be done? How fast can you be done here? I said, 6 weeks. 6 weeks to the day I landed in Tokyo. And then Tokyo happened. And then I went back to Florida, and it ended up being, instead of 4 months, 2 years I was on the road. And so I think that sort of the big lesson out of all that is you got to be flexible in this industry. And if you're open to that, there's a huge world that opens up.
Blessed are the flexible, we will not break.
Ooh, I might plagiarize that. That's a good one.
Yeah,
That's
and I mean, that's quite the golden era. Epcot, Imagineers, Tokyo.
It is.
Even Horizons.
It is the golden era. And I think it's the golden era in a couple of different ways when you kind of, because you're not the first person who said that, by the way.
Oh, yeah. It's a thing.
It is a thing. Because there was so much stuff that was built, and there was no formal structure to do it back then, that it was the golden age of A, building it, but B, the growth of the industry, the industry really coming together and becoming what it is today. Because back then, nobody had any formal training in this. And we all came from someplace else. You either were movies or theater or architecture or someplace, right? It all came from someplace else.
Well, I mean, be fair to say if Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland didn't happen at the same time, open at the same time, and Imagineering didn't lay off as many people at the same time, that there would be no themed entertainment association or industry that we have today.
I talk about this a bit, and the perspective that I would give to this is, to your point, WED, back then, WED Enterprises, right, forerunner to WDI, WED grew from a few hundred people to a few thousand people, back down to a few hundred people. So what happened to all those people? They basically went out on the street. Well, the '84 Olympics came in right behind that, because that drop was in '83, right? So the '84 Olympics came in and was hugely successful, and the LA Olympics, and then the Vancouver World's Fair in '86 was hugely successful, and between those two projects, and the notion of entertainment now becoming more and more accepted, and accepted on the international market as well. When you started to put all that, that became the catalyst that brought our business together. And I believe that the business as you know it today really is an outcome of those two projects, right? TDL and Epcot in the early 80s.
Yeah, so you had a chance to take the show on the road kind of for about a dozen years, right?
Right. Well, yeah, because then so now the Vancouver World's Fair catalyzed the expo market, and I ended up having my own business at that time, doing project management, owners representation, basically focused on the entertainment components. We did Brisbane in '88, and then Osaka in '90, and then Daejeon, Korea in '93. So we went from Australia up to Japan and into Korea. And then that business collapsed with the economic collapse in the early '90s. And then themed retail started. So our industry is a wave, right? And you can see it sort of cycle through, either from the mega projects or from, themed retail or LBE or, you name it. And you watch the trends as they roll through.
What was it that lured you back to the House of Mouse after all those years of freedom and flexibility?
Well, it's about when opportunities come across, you got to kind of look at them and where your head's at the time.
Well, you had a chance to be your own boss, I guess, your own business owner, and
very
your own
to say.
AP AR department. How fun was that?
Not too much fun. Accounts receivable is something I did not care to do.
You mean that's not what you were wired?
No, it's not what I was wired to do.
That's not what you were made for.
I bet you it's the same with you. I love to do the project work. Yeah. And I really kind of figured out by that point that's my calling.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a project guy. And to this day, I still do projects. I enjoy it. I'm very much enamored about it. So when Disney came knocking in the mid-'90s, they were looking for somebody who had been both inside and outside. And they were getting into the LBE market, and it was Disney Regional Entertainment at that time with art.
I almost love to work for you there.
Right, there you go. And that industry, we were supposed to do, I think it was 4 or 5 Disney Quests a year, 4 or 5 Club Disneys, and 4 or 5 ESPNs. And that was the portfolio that we were going to roll out across, the world, basically. And I think what we found, that industry, the technology wasn't really there yet. So you couldn't refresh it economically as quickly as you needed to. And I think so that business kind of went boomed and busted pretty quickly. So then I was sitting around, and they said, well, we need a little help on Paris Second Gate. And I did the packaging and passed it off to Paul LaFrance, who did the execution on it. And then they said, well, listen, we want to do another park in Asia. We're not quite sure, but we think it's probably Hong Kong. And that was the beginning of that journey that was 8 years.
Wow.
That became that. And I went from an idea to opening day. So,
wow.
Which was really quite unique.
Blue sky to build.
Yeah, I mean, it's very seldom do you get to live that kind of duration on a single project.
And I mean, that project as a castle park, but with a little bit different kind of design day capacity, I imagine. I know Tom Morris is a friend.
Yes.
You've got some unique gyrations you have to go through to understand what the core brand or essence of a Disney castle park expectation is.
You talk about Tom. Tom was sitting right in the middle of that from a brand standpoint.
Yeah.
And he can speak, obviously, to that with great wisdom and knowledge. I think a couple of things happen with that. The notion that that Disney could scale its park, right? And the notion of what is the core brand, right? And I think this is a learning. Probably it's going to be a learning for Universal, right? Mm-hmm. Universal's trying to now scale their product, right? when your brand becomes of a critical mass, I think it's a very interesting issue as to how you place your brand accordingly from that point. And Tom was living right smack in the middle of all of that. So the thinking was stay true to the brand. And then, of course, when people came through the gate, they said, it's absolutely fantastic what's here. Where's the other half of it, right? And I think everybody knows the history of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of associations with the Disneyland name specifically, more so than just Disney generically. Right?
Exactly, as we go through.
Well, for what it's worth, I probably had my best theme park day in my life with I had just adopted my youngest son Joshua, and was smart enough to book a red eye out of Lantau Airport and had a full day to just try to stay up with him as I chased him around Hong Kong Disneyland. And I really felt like I got an experience of what mid-century Disneyland would have been like when it probably was at the 5 million target attendance level back in the early 50s.
Well,
50s,
so what was the first few years of
it was
Disney?
Really charming.
It was a few million people, right?
Exactly.
Annual attendance,
charming,
right?
Intimate. Yeah,
exactly. And it really it captured that spirit, as you well said.
Yeah.
Very much captured it. But the marketplace there, by and large, the Hong Kong market was very sophisticated and had been to Tokyo.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. And so there was an expectation as to what the brand was all about.
Right.
And I think that was sort of some of the issues that were then carried forward to other parks going forward from that point. Right.
So what caused you to kind of depart from Disney and kind of what's been on the horizon the last few years?
Well, I don't sit around very well. It's just not in my nature.
Not a lot of tea time for you.
No, it's just not. I'm just not wired that way. So, for example, when I came back from Hong Kong, it was time to look for another gig, right? And I always sort of learned that you need to look forward and plan accordingly. So I did licensing for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios for about 5 years, and then Disney called again. And that was Shanghai, and doing the project management for Shanghai Disneyland for the park, so that was the next major chapter, and that will probably be the biggest thing. It will be the biggest thing I've ever done, and a great honor to have that seat.
Yeah, quite the accomplishment. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I didn't want to skip. You've given back to our industry in pretty significant ways, both with the founding of the Themed Entertainment Association and the design guidelines. You mind just sharing some of the effort that went into kind of establishing some not only the association but standards for our industry?
So you got to back up for a second and sort of think about where we were in the story arc of that period of time. So as I said before, Epcot, TDL, boom, bust, not bust, but all those people go out on the street. Mm-hmm. Then you have the success of the World's Fair and Vancouver and so on and so forth, and the Expo. And the Olympics rather, and what we were finding was in the industry, when we were being approached, there was no means and methods. There was no standards. There was no processes that we could articulate and communicate to developers as they came along. And what we felt, there were a few of us that got together, and really Monty Lundy articulated it beautifully. And he sent a letter around in the early 90s. And he said, in a paraphrase, in essence, what he was saying is, by us being able to explain our process, we are able to communicate between us better and communicate to developers that come into our industry. And I believe that process is like driving your car, right? You know instinctually, I drive on the right-hand side of the road here, right? That means your mind is now free to have a conversation with your passenger. You're not worrying about which side of the road to drive on because everybody has to drive on that side of the road. So you can put your mind where you need to put it, someplace else. That's what process is. Process is an enabler, right? So we wanted it to enable our industry to communicate better and to work better as an organization. We also felt that we thought that if we could mass together, we could have more buying power, which was an interesting concept, never was successful, which was we would go buy common insurance, health insurance, by way of example. So when you left Project A and went to Project B, your health insurance traveled with you. We tried to do a few other things like that. So at the same time, I was doing a lot of work with my business partner at the time, Mike Morris, and we got asked to write a book. So the project development guidelines we wrote, and it was a methodology, and I think we sold all of 2 books, probably.
It's a niche market.
A very niche market. And I have one of those 2 books, kind of thing, right? But really what we did at that time was we said, look, we need this process. And because those books didn't sell, we gave that book basically to TEA, and it became the basis of the project development guidelines of today. And that basically iterated 3 times. And I did the first draft as the chair of the standards committee, I guess we called it. I can't remember. And then there were 2 other, Joe McHugh, I think, did the 2 other iterations of it. And the one that's online now that should be updated, by the way, was last published, I think, in 505 or something like that.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, it needs an overhaul.
Yeah. Well, you've worked with some amazing leaders, probably some good, bad, and ugly leaders, actually.
No, everybody's great.
Everybody's great.
Everybody's great.
Everybody's awesome.
Exactly.
Just in terms of different team structures, different leadership styles, different paradigms. Any thoughts in terms of some of the different places and teams that you've been part of? Obviously, organizations of different sizes and scales, and what is there any preferred structures or models that really just kind of resonate?
Well, you're right to point out there are a lot of different structures and models, right? And those structures and models, I think, at the end of the day, every project's unique, and you have to tailor it to whatever that is. And by the way, the project development guidelines are a guideline. They are not set in stone.
It's not the Bible.
Right?
It's
that
Quran.
kind of thing. So I think we all know the same thing about projects and management styles. You know it when you're with a team that is, the energy is great. Right? You can feel that energy, right? You can feel, well, why is that energy there? Right? That energy's there because the team knows that they know where they're going, they know what they're doing, they know the direction, and they can go home at night and think about it. And then they sleep on it, and they come in the next morning and they're energized. They run into their buddy at the coffee machine and they say, "Hey, I thought about." And the idea gets better because of that interaction. Likewise, you've also been in teams that don't have that, and you can feel the disruption. And the disruption is people walk in and I'm not quite sure what we're doing today, but we're here, right? And there's an energy that's sort of chaotic in that. And one of the learnings I got along the way was when I went back to Disney round 3 and was doing project management for the park, as I say, in Shanghai. Orlando Ferrante would come by and see me about once a quarter and take me out to lunch, and I would ask him the issue of the day, and I said, he would always answer, give me great advice. Then he always ended in the same way, and he said, well, John, you just get the right people together and empower them, you'll be just fine. And what is that message underneath? The message is it's all about people.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So your original question was management styles. And some management styles believe that it's about command and control. I believe it's not about command and control. I believe it's about empowerment and optimization. A great leader optimizes their team. A great leader empowers their team, and they give them a vision as to the direction of where to go, right? One of the things that I firmly believe in is start with why. If I talk to you about why we're doing something, and you agree with me why we're doing it, right? You're going to figure out the how and the what, right? But if you and I don't agree on why we're doing this, we're never going to, synchronize our energy. It's just not going to happen, right? So you got to have a common why. And if you're working with people, don't talk to people about you need to do this, right? Talk to them why we're doing this. And once you get the why across, all the rest comes along with it. So it's really command and control, I think, is certainly one that's easier for many people to do, right? But really what gets the most out of a team is that empowerment where they are not disrupted in their thinking and they're empowered to go talk to their buddy and go, let's make this better.
Yeah, especially in a creative development, industry, the idea of not losing the plot, and helping people find that plot.
And what is project management, right? Our job is to deliver the creative vision. Our job is to put as much, as I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, we are here to put every penny in front of the guest, right? Think about that. That means soft costs. You got to balance. How much design iteration am I going to do where enough is enough, right? Because if I iterate again, I'm going to consume more budget and I'm going to have less money to put in front of the guest, right? If I have a bigger team, I have less money to put in front of the guest, right? So people think about value engineering just on hard costs. Value engineering is the entire life cycle of the project, right, as they think through it. So really, management style is about getting people to understand that full cycle.
Well, John, you've been to the promised land and back. What are those big kind of, I guess, looking back and taking the long view, those more of those nuggets, those kind of paradigms, those kind of life lessons, if you were mentoring or imparting that to, kind of a
Well, I have a few
generation.
of them. I have a few of them, and I think the people are doing it. Probably those who know me will probably tell you what they are. Again, I think it's a few simple things. One is always try and keep it simple, right, as you go through this process. I believe nobody can remember more than three things. Right? So if you're going to have a big conversation with somebody or a group, what are the three things you want them to walk out with? Right? Same way, nobody can think more than 3 months ahead. So if you're going to do a near-term schedule with somebody, don't be thinking farther than that. Think about what's 3 months ahead, right? So right now we're in May. What's 3 months ahead of May, right? School's out.
Yep, my family's Hawaiian summer vacation.
Right, exactly. Right. Now you're in the summer. What's 3 months? Oh, school's back in. The kids are going back in. What's 3 months? Oh, it's Halloween. People only think in those kinds of cycles.
I think of it as the Post-it note on my forehead with my 3 bullet points. Right. That's all I've got.
Right, exactly. Keep it simple. Keep it direct. Because when people commingle ideas and put too many things on the table, people lose track of where they are. I was really struck by. Did you read the book about Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
And there was a section in there about the iPad, and he's designing the iPad, and they beveled the side of the iPad, and all the engineers wanted to go straight down, right? And he said, no, it has to be beveled because you have to be able to scoop it up. It has to be able to scoop up purity of thought, right? Keep it simple. Start with why, right? So those are the kinds of things I think people, keep in mind. Context before content is another one. Don't ever come to somebody and start giving them a really meaty idea without giving them the context of the meaty idea. They'll just get lost. They won't be with you. So context before content, 3 things at a time, right? There's a whole list of these that go on and on.
I'm looking forward to the book, the next book, the sequel.
There you go, the sequel. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, but there you go.
So what's over the next horizon for you, for the industry? What's next?
Well, okay. So for me, one of the things I've come to know about myself is I just don't sit around. So I'll keep doing projects, probably for a while in one way or another. What's out there for the industry is an interesting conversation. I think it's really, what is the basis of our industry as we think about it, right? The basis of our industry is the ability to think extremely widely, right? If you think about, I'm going to go build a building has, well, CSI used to be 1 to 17, sorry. And then they've expanded it up to 30 something. I can't remember what the number is. I remember being at WDI, and WDI had 1 to 40 divisions of work.
140.
140, yeah. Right? Divisions of work. If you think about that and think about how we organize these big projects, there's core structure of, we think multidisciplinary as we go through it. That's the strength of our industry. And so where do you apply that thinking? If you hold true to that thought process, where you apply it can be very different places.
Absolutely.
Right? And that gives you the ability to survive in this industry, right?
You mean there's more application than just $1 billion plus theme park?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
What a concept.
Exactly. And so I think what's really important is that those of us in the industry think horizontally, right? Think laterally as we go through it. And that will open up more and more opportunities. What the nature of that is always going to change and always evolve, right? We've lived through LBE. We've lived through Disney Regional Entertainment. We lived through the Warner Brothers stores when they were out there. We've lived through all of these different things in various, and there are different cycles and different trends as they go through. But the ability to think horizontally and the integration of all of this work is our core strength as an industry.
Awesome. Well, John, thanks for letting us catch you while we can.
My pleasure.
And looking forward to having the conversations with the rest of the TIA crowd here.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much.
Well, hello again. Hey, John.
Hey.
Looking good at the home office?
Indeed.
Well, thanks for everyone for joining and for bringing in the great question. I can tell by the nature of some of the questions that are coming in that you've got people thinking at a whole nother level where we've kind of elevated, in terms of time and big picture thinking. And I really appreciate that big picture perspective that you've already given us, John.
So what are some of these wonderful questions? Are you over there reading? Is that what I'm checking out?
Yeah, well, I'll try to pace them for you as we go. But just wanted to give you a chance to say hi to everybody in person here.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time. And I hope you found it interesting. I actually enjoyed it, sort of watching it. And Mel, I think you did a great job asking questions along the way.
Well, it's just holding on for the e-ticket white knuckle ride that is your life, man. So it's been a joy. So I'm going to start with one that's just kind of throw down in the ground in the mud. Tracy asked the question: what happens when a project is just plain going off the rails? And I'd love personally, I don't know what you're allowed to share or willing to share, but I'd love to hear a case study example of kind of worst case scenario. What's the first reaction? What's the right reaction to things going south really quickly?
Well, okay. All right. So I won't call out anyone. And I won't call out anyone.
Well, that's no fun.
That's appropriate. That's not appropriate. I think projects go off the rails when...
You have to read Jim Cora's book, by the way. That's a little...
There we go. The Cora... No, he didn't do the Triangle of Success. Who was that? Anyway, we'll let that go. I think it's really, as I was talking about before, which is simply put, projects that have clear vision and direction and everybody working in alignment proceed well.
Yeah.
Right? By alignment, I mean each other can finish the other one's thought. They know what they're relying upon the other person for. They know that their work has to pace to feed the next person's work. I think when projects go off the rails is when they don't keep themselves all synchronized. And that the vision is not clearly understood. As I said before, process is to create the structure so that people can think, right? Not as a limiter, but an enabler. And so if people create a process for their project, whether it be a schedule, whether it be a way they communicate, whatever it is, if they can enable that as a tool so that they can really put their mind into creating the best possible product, that's when it works great. When it doesn't work great is when people are not in sync. So I'll give you one example, and it will remain nameless. I was working in that part of the world, and the team of expats were, let's get this done. What's the road? Let's go, you know? And the locals were like, okay, let's, yeah, we're there. We're going fast. And then the expats would go, yeah, but we've got to go through this process to go fast, right? And this process is we have a design review, we look at the drawings, we did this, we got to finish that, we got to, and the locals are going, well, I've never done it that way. I just need the thing. Give me the thing and I'll get going, right? So if you don't get yourself in sync with the environment that you're with, you need to understand the local perspective with the international perspective when you're doing these big international projects. That's what I mean by alignment. They weren't listening to each other, right? They were talking both were saying, let's go fast, but neither one understood the other one's process and perspective. And so bringing that thinking together is really critical.
That's great. Do you have a sense of like the amount of time you need to get acculturated or acclimated to a different kind, or is it just vary based on that, the context?
Well, I think it varies based on the context and where you are in the world and so on and so forth. All of these places are very different in their basis of understanding.
Yeah, I can only imagine the difference of even Tokyo versus Shanghai.
Well, I think the most extreme was Hong Kong had the great structure, was very structured, right? As the government was there. When you go to some place like Shanghai, less so. Let's just sort of leave it that way.
Right. Someone actually had a question related to, your start with the why philosophy. Good clarifying question from Michael, just asking which why is more important, the story of the business case, and how do you recommend changing people's minds? Is it the story of the concept? How do you kind of run that filter of clarity around the why?
Well, both of those really are who's the end user, right? The why, where the why comes together of story and business, is your audience, right? Business is how much do I value? What is the value of the story and the entertainment, right? And what's the warranted investment against that value, right? And that's the convergence. So start with why, which is the audience, right? Always remember, it's all about people, but the last person you really want to think about is the person who comes through the door, right? Which is really the first person you want to think about, because that's where the why comes together.
Absolutely. Here. Hey, my friend Kyle has a great question. Can you name some or give some airtime as to how you empower your teams and colleagues? There's so much gold in that empowerment idea. It's such a buzzword, but I have a feeling you've got a long track record of doing it before it was selling books. And what does that actually consist of, moment by moment, in an atmosphere or a culture?
I think it obviously start with why, right? That we just talked about. I think context before content, right? So often people are focused on what the issue is and get into a tactical mode before they contextualize what the issue is. So if you don't stay with context for every decision, as you move through the development process, you start to lose people along the way, right? That why are we doing this? What's the context of this decision? What's the purpose of where we're going? So empowerment is about common understanding. It's in common vision and common direction and common process, right? It's the commonality of the team that makes the team members feel comfortable that their contribution is of power, is of strength, right? And so that empowerment comes out of knowing that I am a contributor, right? And that my contribution is important regardless of what role I play, because it fits within a greater structure. That's the context. So you play the two against each other and just keep your team in the know. Keep your team. Don't be disruptive, right? Keep the team going in the same direction and understanding the same things. And, they're all smart, creative, hugely talented organizations out there, right? Bring them into with the issues. And when there are issues, share the issues. Don't hold the issues back, because it's like saying, well, you're not smart enough to deal with the issues. Let me deal with them and I'll spoon feed them to you, right? That's not how this works, right? It's about the team, right? And that's what gets the empowerment there.
Right. People are really wanting to dig into the meat and potatoes here. So, in terms of aligning with the local culture, what's your specific first step in accomplishing that, in getting that started? Do you articulate and guide that conversation kind of in both directions? Is there any on that?
Read.
It's a good first step.
Yeah, read. So I went to Tokyo, right, for TDL, and I read Shogun, right? I went to the Middle East and I read The Prize, right? Read.
Yeah.
Right? That's the first thing. Go read some history about wherever you're going, right? Because it gives you perspective where everybody's coming from.
Absolutely.
And I think, I really think the more you kind of understand what your locale is about, then the more you can acclimate to it. The other thing I would say to you is make sure you're hearing. I love one of my other ones is you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? You should listen twice as hard, right? So listen. And it's completely fair to say back, I think I'm hearing. Do I hear you correctly? Right? There's a way of doing it. Try and look at the world through their eyes. I think your issues are this. I think your concerns are that.
Yeah, empathy. What a concept.
Empathy, indeed. Indeed.
Let's see here. As we've got a few questions about career advice. I'm going to try to save some of those to the end. But in terms of that long view, Ryan Lundy's asking, what's been the most interesting or surprising change you've seen in the industry since you've started? And do you think the industry is in a better place overall now? Or have we seen, we peaked in the 80s or 90s? I don't know.
So how we peaked in the 80s and that was a long question, right? It had things inside of it. And so say it again. What are the 3 things that were buried in there?
Where do you think we're headed?
Where we're headed.
Is it in a better place than where we've been?
Industry. Yeah. There was 3 of them. I was trying to hear all 3.
But it's basically where are we going, and is it better than where we've been?
It's better where, I'm an optimist always, right? It is always going to be better. And my point when I was talking about thinking laterally is what other forms of entertainment are there out there? What other forms of applying my knowledge, as we go through it? Because entertainment has cycles. Our industry, when you fundamentally have a business structure that is based on multi-billion-dollar projects going through a pipe sometimes a drought of 10 years, right? But you've got to recalibrate. You have to do something else. So that's what I meant by when I said think laterally, so that you can feed yourself over here when these aren't happening on the other end. The second thing is to think about what our entertainment is. Our entertainment is really environmental entertainment, immersive entertainment. You can use whatever buzzword you want to use. So think of how you can apply that, whether it be, a very small scale or a very large scale. How do you apply that thinking? Because the process is pretty much the same. It's just the depth of the documentation, so to speak, as you go through it, right? The depth of the problem solving and the thinking and the speed in which you have to go to market. So I think the future is the ability, the people who will be successful in the future are the people who think horizontally and think of how they can apply their craft and our industry of entertainment horizontally to multiple kinds of ways of applying it, right? Whether it is from restaurants to, hotels to, whatever. I mean, it's immersive entertainment. How do you apply that thinking? So if you think that, then the future is going to be rosy.
I agree. Freddie has a question. How do you keep external vendors focused on the why when they may not see their effort as part of the final guest experience, when they're not kind of making that direct connection?
I mean, there you go, right? Well, I think the way you do that is you back up and you say, okay, look, we are multidisciplinary teams. And with the exception of the big players in the industry, nobody has everybody in-house. So therefore, the way to think, and this is a delicate balance, right? Because there are the commercial relationships, but in essence, what one is trying to say is we are all staff extension to the project, right? We are a virtual team. We come together, we do work together, and so on and so forth. What makes it easier when you get older is that you've been around enough that there are a few other people on that team that you've seen before.
Sure.
And it sort of creates that camaraderie environment that those who are, vendors or consultants or whatever, they see that camaraderie. Oh, they worked together before. Oh, they're not on the same, work for the same company, but they deal with each other like they did, right? And I think it's incumbent upon those who work together again on a project to share that enthusiasm and sort of that collegial atmosphere, and that brings the team together.
That's a great point. Yeah, they've gone through the hurdles of forms, storm, norm, form.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's a good basis to, need teams around. It's kind of like, it reminds me of young couples. If you don't have a chance to figure out how to do life together before you start popping out the kids, you're a rough road. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Awesome. Hey, my friend Adam has a great question. Have you had to change the process for different teams, or do you have the team just adjust to the process?
You change the process for the team. But the backbone logic is always the same. I mean, think about the creative process. It's ideation followed by implementation, right? So you got to sort of stay on the arc, right?
Right.
And
there's when the point where ideating should be, kind of the train has left the ideating station at some point.
Yeah, and it gets back to that point I was trying to make about you got to put every penny in front of the guest, right? So if you can streamline that process and hold the team, the accountability is not about people spending money wrong or being, overly doing it. It's we lose perspective, we lose context, right? And the context is the reason we're making this decision to move forward is because it's part of the better good of the whole thing, right? And so process is about where am I in that arc, and understanding where my boundaries are to keep it moving forward, right? But you have to tailor it. Remember, what we do is a creative process. And so you narrow that thinking, leaving a few key pieces, bandwidth to breathe. A creative idea has to breathe. And you can't simply shove it down a pipe and say, okay, out the other end, must be done. It doesn't work that way, right? So you have to find that balance between the two.
Great. I'm just thinking of a few creative directors I know that would wish it could happen like that.
Right.
You mentioned the Project Standards booth or book. Kind of getting a little long in the tooth. It's been a while, probably the longest duration since it was created, since it's needed an update. Any particular changes or topics, or just right off top of your mind that probably could and should be addressed in that?
I think that the easiest thing is to simplify, right? I think it's meaty, and it needs a simpler path. And I've been really focused on how do you distill this process and make it as simple as possible. And I have some real thoughts about that that have sort of matured over time about what are really, at the end of the day, the key issues. And focusing on that, and let the rest be organic to the need of the project, right? And if you shove too much process into the system, you're stifling the ability for, the project to germinate and grow and mature in its own way, right? So I think what I would do is really try and focus on what are the key attributes of the development process that you have to hold true to as sort of key touch points, and then what are the pieces that sort of come and go and hang off of that structure.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more, especially also the ability for the same basic project framework to be able to scale up and down.
Exactly.
Based on different size and scope and complexity of the project.
Core attributes, it doesn't matter what size the scale the project is, where it is on that scale. Core attributes always remain the same.
Yep.
Right.
Awesome. Let's see. I've got the go-to question that is asked at every one of these for just any advice for emerging professionals just trying to get into their first job in the themed entertainment industry.
So I had an interesting conversation with somebody the other day on this subject, and I think the first thing is to think where do you want to be? What do you want to do, right? And there are two kinds of people in our industry, right? There are integrators and they're subject matter experts. Work breakdown structure, integrators, project managers, creative directors, cost estimators, planner schedulers, right? They're all about integration, right? Ride engineer. It's all about subject matter expert. Figure out where you want to be first, right? And then start to look for jobs that fit in that niche. Some people like to really deep dive on a subject matter. The integrators, that's not what they do. Their job is to think holistically across the whole board, right? They know everything a little bit, right? But they know nothing really deep. Kind of thing, right? So you want to think about that as you go through the process, right? Of kind of where you want to start. Then look at entry-level jobs that do that, right? And when you think about, one of my frustrations is when people go to school and then they go to school and then they go to school and they go to school and they eventually get really lofty degrees and they jump over into the industry. And they've missed all of this stuff. And so they don't have the foundation underneath them to understand how the pieces start to go together, right? So if you want to be an engineer, be a draftsman for a while, right? Start down at the bottom. If you want to be an integrator, maybe be working planning and scheduling, right? So that you start to understand where all the bits go together, right? Don't think, oh, I want to be a project manager, so I'm going to go be an assistant project manager day one. Think about, how do I learn about the pieces of the puzzle of my craft that I want to learn so I can build from that.
Yeah, we have another question regarding kind of the ideal project leadership structure at the top of the pyramid, if you will. You and I talked a little bit about that left, right brain of a project. Is that a two-headed beast, a three-headed delta? What's that look like in your experience of the projects that really kind of sing?
I think that if you think about think about what I just talked about in project life cycle, right? There's ideation and there's delivery. There's creative and implementation. I don't care what words you use, there are two sides of the puzzle. If you can get those two sides of the puzzle thinking as close together as possible and see the same thing and do the same thing and finish each other's paragraph and sentence, that's ideal. So leadership teams that have two people at the top, one is about creative vision and one is about how do I deliver that creative vision, to me, that's ideal. And there are other projects that have really focused on, well, you need an implementer of the creative idea stuck in the middle there someplace, because the implementer can't interpret the creative idea, right? The goal should be to get those two minds as close together as possible and not put a buffer in between. So I would say to you, leadership organizations that really grow, and you see these, right? You see these groups that there's the business side and there's the, widget side. There's the, look at the two Disney brothers, right? When that started, right? Walt was the vision, and so, Roy looked after the books, it's sort of, think about it that way, right? And I think organizations that really purity of thought, that get those two groups as tight as possible, succeed the best.
Well, there's a power when those are really balanced, because I'm sure you've seen is every once in a while, kind of one half of the organization gets a little more power, or it's the project triangle turn to really help.
But keep in mind, in the beginning, right, in ideation, the creative mind should have more power.
Sure.
Right? So the implementer should be in the back seat, right? And then there's a tipping point at some point when you're, pouring concrete, that the implementer has to kind of be reality check and think, right? But they understand their balance and their roles along the way and when to defer to the other, right? So,
love it. Awesome. Well, so kind of talking about highlights, you have a favorite project that you watched come alive from dream to dedication, kickoff to completion? Any favorite children of yours? I know that normally you can't pick from your favorite life kids.
Projects. You always, all of them are great, right? Yeah. But there is nothing like these all-consuming mega projects. And by the way, if you're going to do one of these mega projects, be prepared.
Yeah.
Strap on your seatbelt, right? Let everybody know around you it's going to be a ride. Enjoy the ride, right? Because it's consuming, right? The really big, complex projects are incredibly interesting, but they are consuming. And so you have to be prepared going into them that that's what it's going to take. And you have to prepare your family, and you have to prepare your friends and people around you, and that's what's going to happen, right? But I would say, without a doubt, my most interesting projects have always been the really big projects.
Awesome. Well, I guess this is really relevant to those really big projects. Bradley's asking, how do you keep project teams motivated when everyone has different personalities, different needs? Is it by sharing the big picture with them constantly, by having a caring management team? Kind of, he just stated, I sometimes struggle motivating teams, even at kind of mid-level management jobs. So is there any magic tricks to that from a project leadership level?
I think it is about listening to everybody on the team and making everybody on the team feel that they are contributing and where their contribution fits in the big scheme of things, right? And be gracious to the team, right? Be welcoming to the team. I was doing a very large project, and the executive leadership of the corporation changed halfway through, 3/4 of the way through. And, I would, when the executives would come out to the site, the first executive, was very gracious, right? And I'd whisper in his ear as we walked up to, how it is when you do these big projects, there's everybody stationed all along the way, and I'd whisper, here's the name of the person and here's what they're doing, and thank them for something, right? And executive A would always stick his hand out and make that person feel like $1 million, right? Just remember their name, thank them for what they were doing, all of that. Executive A retires, Executive B appears, Executive B sticks his hand out and says, thank you for your service. Well, who do you going to want to work for, right? Somebody who's rigid and sort of says nothing about what you're doing and personalizes it, or, somebody who really tries to thank you from their heart, right? Everybody contributes to a project. Everybody contributes. Remember that, right? And keep everybody, talk to everybody. Make them feel part of the family.
Yeah, that's true. And really, again, like you said, that sense of truly understanding and just genuinely appreciating everyone's role, because it's hard to fake that, right? The executive B might have had a different personality, but at the end of the day, I just feel like he probably didn't sincerely understand or believe or took the time to really.
I think the last one took the time.
Yeah.
Took the time to think about it, right?
Right.
And I bet you Executive A came up from the floor, right? And Executive B came across from the top.
Right. There's those people that manage upwards, and they spend all their time and energy manage upwards rather than managing the people they're supposed to lead. So, great. Mark is asking a question about some of the specific ones, and not just pivot into the theme of entertainment industry, but specifically as a project manager, asking for as much information as they could soak up, any specific resources for skills development from a project management perspective that you'd recommend.
I think that, as I said before, I think it's really important to understand the pieces of the puzzle. And so by that, I mean, I think it's really important to, I mentioned, I started on the floor building scenery, right? So what is scenery? When you put a scene together, you got to put a light fixture in it. You got to put a speaker over here. You might have an animated figure that's got some show action. Well, next thing you know, you're integrating all these pieces, right? Find a role that's about integration, because project management is about integration. And then try and think as widely as possible about that integration, right? Because our job is to look at all the pieces and find the handshakes between all the pieces and make sure that those handshakes are happening. So as you move up in through the system, constantly run between all the disciplines and say, what do you need to be successful, right? Because we're here to enable that person. We're here to make sure. And then after you do a few projects, you start to see down the road. And then you start to say, hey, I think what's going to happen is this, right? And you make a prediction. It's great making predictions, right? because it's, have you thought through everything? And now you get down the road and you go, wow, no, I didn't get it totally right, but I got some of it right. Gee, I learned from that. I can apply it to the next thing, right? So it's kind of about maturing of a thought process as you go through it, but start at the basic. And if you start at the basic and really take pleasure and enjoy understanding the basics, you can build upon that. But if you don't get a good foundation, it's really hard. It's really hard when you get up farther up in the ladder, because you don't have, you're kind of teetering because you don't have all those pieces of the puzzle.
Right. Wesley has a question. He's part of a small architecture construction tech company that's focusing on smaller immersive projects like tiki bars, etc. Question is what your thoughts are on the state of smaller immersive projects. It's something that my friend Adam Bezark is really excited about as well. The idea of smaller scale, more intimate things. Any thoughts on where you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that. So first thing is, I think they're spot on, right? The challenge is how to do it economically, and I think the key is, are you doing a one-off or are you going to do a rollout? And to make them work economically, you're doing a rollout, right?
Yeah.
The reason why you can make money off a movie is not because it plays in one movie theater, it's because it plays in millions of movie theaters, right?
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
That's what you're trying to do, right? So think about that. If you're not rolling out, then you have to be very creative about what you're going to use, right? You don't have the money to go, and you have to be incredibly prudent and organic in your approach. And you got to start there, and you got to start there with passion, right? So figure out which one you want to do. Do you want to do the rollout or you want to do the one-off? And if you want to do the one-off, it's really a piece of art versus a rollout, which is a business.
That's a great line of differentiation for people to understand, because I think a lot of us that are passionate can get confused and blur those lines sometimes, right? And maybe the best case, it could be a little bit of art and business, but it probably one needs a lead out, I think, from a fair amount.
You might look at Meow Wolf and how that's
yeah,
right?
Or Disneyland. I mean, well, yeah,
Disneyland. I think Disneyland was a little bit different.
Yeah,
right. I don't know all the details on Meow Wolf, as I said, but I think it was a bunch of artists that came together.
Yeah, using trash.
Right.
A lot of trash for raw material. Awesome. Talking about kind of just fun highlights, any kind of the career reels, any favorite moments that come to mind, on all your international journeys? I mean, what you've experienced, John, is something that a lot of us, myself included, would just dream of a career spanning that kind of geography and that projects of that scope and scale. Any just particular moment that just comes to mind for you?
It doesn't really. No, I mean, it's there's just no question that I guess the particular moment in time is always the opening day, right?
Yeah.
It has to be.
Hey, getting a window on Main Street, that's pretty cool too. Getting the recognition after.
I'll tell you a story about Hong Kong. So at the opening of Hong Kong, I was standing off. So the turnstiles were here, and I was standing to the side looking down the turnstiles. Right, and the queue was backed up behind the turnstile, and the countdown was happening. They let him in, and like the third guy in he's clearly a Caucasian guy from someplace in the world, right, other than Hong Kong. And he's got a vest on. He's got every friggin' badge on, the Disney, stuff and paraphernalia. he jumps up in the air and then gets down on all fours and kisses the ground. It was extraordinary, right? And you lose track of who your audience is, right? I often show the picture when I talk to people and I finish my presentation, and I show the picture of the rope drop, at the end of Main Street. That's your audience. That's you live for that moment.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm talking about.
Love it.
Right. Remember, so your best moment is that moment.
Yeah.
Right. Without a doubt.
Well, John, I can't thank you enough. Your discipline, your experience, what you bring. I mean, the difference between kind of those of us, especially those of us involved on the creative design side, the batting average, projects that are dreamed up versus the ones that actually happen. It's people like you that make that stuff get off the paper, get off the page, and actually exist in 3 dimensions. And some of the insights that you shared, at the highest level, I think, is just so important. I mean, because it's just one thing to have pretty pictures and vaporware all day long, but to actually have those crowds lined up at the rope drop, and to have these deals that have to get made, these contracts that have to get signed, and all the levels of communication, it's pretty astonishing.
Well, it takes all of us, right? And it takes, and to your point, the two at the top glued together, right? You can't do one without the other, right? It's really that simple.
Amen. Well, that'll preach. Hey, thanks, John. Thanks everyone that listened in now and in the future. And I really appreciate your support of the Themed Entertainment Association Master Series. And again, John, thanks so much for giving back so much to our industry in this community over the years and in the future. And look forward to playing in some pretty amazing sandboxes with you.
Looking forward to it. Absolutely. Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.